there's the whole imposter syndrome thing where you're like, who am I here? I've always been like switching hats so much. Like, am I a composer, or am I a band director, or am I an orchestra director? And you can be all those things, but people like to pigeonhole you a little bit, And so I'm always sort of like, are people going to not take my music seriously because I'm a middle school band director, or are people not going to take me seriously as a music educator because they know I put so much time and energy into the composition, So it's a weird little game, but they're all pieces of who we are. So you got to do them.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the good fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio-on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you knew one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now, onto my next guest, Andrew David Perkins. Hi, Andy.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for joining me on short notice. It's been a little bit crazy the last couple of weeks. This is the resumption of episodes after me taking a week off here.
Yeah, we're really living through something here. But this is a real honor for me. I'm a big fan of the show, and I love what you're doing, so I'm excited to be a part of it.
Excellent. I really appreciate that. And so, Andy, can you introduce yourself for the listeners? Tell everyone what you do and where you are and all that stuff.
Sure. I'm Andy Perkins. I'm a composer, conductor, and music educator. And I live in Fenton, Michigan, which is a suburb of Flint, about halfway between Ann Arbor and Flint. And I've been a band director and music teacher in Fenton schools for 18 years. And I also serve as the music department chairperson for the district. And I've taught 6th through 12th grade band, everything: marching band, concert band, jazz band, percussion ensemble, competitive drumline. And I've also taught music technology and some sections of choir as well. I'm currently teaching 6th through 8th grade band at Andrew G. Schmidt Middle School here in Fenton. And I'm also the music director and conductor of the Fenton Community Orchestra, which I've been doing for the last 9 years. And for the last decade or so, I've been composing and publishing my own works for wind band, orchestra, and small ensemble. And I'm also married and have 2 wonderful daughters. So my life is very full of many things that I'm deeply grateful for.
Indeed. So there's a lot there to talk about. So we'll dig into all of these things here. Can you, before we do all that though, can you kind of give us your origin story? How'd you get started as a musician?
Well, I kind of won the musical lottery and was born into an unusually musical family. I grew up singing and playing music in church, and my mom was an elementary music educator for over 30 years. So I witnessed her passion for making music with kids, and I'm sure that made a deep impression. And my entire family is very musical. My dad sings, and my sister sang throughout school. And she got me into musical theater, which was a huge part of my surviving middle school and high school. In terms of my music career, I knew pretty early that I wanted to either be a filmmaker or a musician. And I was also super into drawing comic books when I was a kid. And for a while, I considered following those other paths. But what ultimately sealed the deal for me was when I spent a summer at Interlochen at the arts camp in northern Michigan. I played trombone in the All-State Orchestra under Larry Livingston. This was after my junior year of high school. I went again after my senior year. And those summers at Interlochen absolutely changed my life. It was a transformative thing for me, just a magical place completely focused on musical expression and excellence. So I knew that I wanted to be a conductor and a composer, and I think those experiences, making music at such a high level and meeting my kind of people, combined with my outstanding high school band experiences. I had really good high school band experiences. Those helped me decide to follow the music path. And so I went to Michigan State for my undergrad, had an outstanding undergrad experience, studied with John Madden and John Whitwell and Dave Catron in the band program, played in the jazz ensemble. I took trombone lessons with Curtis Olson and played euphonium with Phil Cinder for a while as well. And I sang in the State Singers in the Men's Glee Club with John Reed. I did all these really highly musically challenging experiences, great experience. I was a music ed major, instrumental music ed. And I tried to squeeze in some composition as well. But like we were talking about, there isn't much room in that curriculum or in your life at that time to, take any other electives. But I actually did compose a piece for my senior recital. I wrote a piece for trombone and piano, and I found a way to sort of explore that and squeeze it into a music ed degree at my senior recital. So I performed that. I played the piano part on a tape, and then I played the trombone part live. And so that was fun. I kind of, made that happen and did that. But, and I marched in Phantom Regiment Drum and Bugle Corps in college from 98 to 2000. And I was a drum major conductor in 2000. And I learned a lot about the logistics of running an organization that large and complex during those tours. That was really life-changing experiences there. So that was college. And then I was hired at Fenton right out of college. And after I'd been teaching high school band for a few years, Colleen Conway called me up. She had been one of my music ed professors at Michigan State, and she had recently been hired by the University of Michigan to work on the music ed faculty and start a summer's master's degree program. So she invited several of us from undergrad to come down to Ann Arbor and do our master's degrees there. Again, that was a music ed degree. But while I was there, I convinced Jim DePogny to give me composition lessons. So I kind of, again, squeezed in some composition into music ed master's degree, because I was just passionate about that and didn't want to leave that out of my education. So I kept teaching and working on my craft, and then I fell in love and I got married, and my incredible wife really encouraged me to pursue composition seriously. And so I found an outstanding online program at Berklee. And over several years, I earned a specialist certificate in orchestration for film and television. And I also took composition and notation engraving courses, 2 really great classes with the Berklee Online program. I highly recommend that. And then the Fenton Community Orchestra asked me to step in as their music director and conductor, which again created another vehicle for connection and collaboration with local musicians. And this is my first orchestral conducting gig, which I was somewhat nervous about my lack of string expertise coming from the band world. I play upright jazz, bass, and guitar, but I am not a string pedagogue by any means. But, I learned fast, and the people were great, and they showed me techniques and told me about double stops and fingerings, and it was really collaborative. So it's been a fantastic group of people to work with. And finally, I guess for the last 10 years or so, I started writing for large ensemble, and I originally started just writing things for my school wind ensemble and for the community orchestra. And in 2013, I was asked by some colleagues to write a full orchestra piece for the combined Flint Youth Symphony and a visiting French Youth Symphony. It was about 300 people total. It was a massive orchestra of teenagers. And it went really well. It was a fun time and a great piece. And that really moved my composition career into high gear. And I started getting commissions and writing more accessible works for school band and orchestra, and more advanced works for college bands and community bands. And as that part of my career has expanded and our family has expanded as well, I ended up moving over to the middle school in our district. I had been teaching a little bit of middle school. I've been teaching some 7th and 8th, as well as the high school, and kind of going back and forth. And then the opportunity presented itself to take over the 6 to 8 band position exclusively. So I've been doing that for the last year, of course, until a global pandemic canceled everything. So that's my career in a nutshell so far.
All right. So Andy, there's a lot here that you've mentioned. I kind of want to go back, I guess to the beginning, and I want you to talk about your early time at Fenton High School and kind of breaking in as a band director, because I think that's part of the story of something that we all have experienced, and maybe there's some interest there that we could pick up. What have you sort of learned in your time?
Well, I took over a program that had 2 years of just really difficult times. The director before those 2 years was really fantastic, and she did a great job, and she had built the program up over the course of 6 or 7 years, 150 kids in the marching band. And then, she moved on and decided to have kids, and her life moved on a little bit. So then a director came in that, was not a good fit, and the program had kind of tanked. And so I was in a good position to come in, young and full of idealism and sort of fire up the kids and bring some fresh energy and some fresh ideas. So I lucked out in that sense because I wasn't following an immediate predecessor that everyone was, revering. And I didn't get a lot of that old, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so did it this way. And I didn't have to fight that battle, which was nice as a new director and a young director. Because that can be really difficult, if you're following someone, and if you change any little thing, you've got to be really careful and decisive about what's worth changing in those first years. So I lucked out, and I actually overhauled a lot of things. I kind of said, I'm going to change this, and I'm going to do this, and we're going to do this way now. And I was also really fortunate too, because the director, her name is Pam Hayes. She's fantastic. She was the 2 directors ago. She's still in the district teaching some beginning band. So I could, ask for her help and get expertise there. And I also lucked out because the choir director, Brad Wright at Fenton High School, is a brilliant musician as well. And he was happy to sort of take me under his wing and say, like, here's how we do things here. Let's collaborate. Let's work together. And I had a really supportive administration at the time too. So I kind of got lucky and had the right combination of opportunity and excited kids, and support in the district and the parents. I did spend my summer making phone calls though, because so many kids had quit band and I just needed those numbers back. So I got a list of kids who had quit, and all summer long I called up these kids and said, hey, my name's Mr. Perkins. I'm your new band director. I'd love to have you back. What do you play? And so, I was able to pull back quite a few kids and get the band back up to 90 kids that first year. And over the course of 6 or 7 years, when we really had things clicking, we ended up with about 210 kids in the marching program. At the 8th year, I think we were at 210. And we also were fortunate at that time because we were beginning in 5th grade. So we had a 5-6 building. Large groups, and then we had a 7-8 building, and then the high school. So there was a really strong, continuous feeder program. And it's since changed. I mean, districts, reorganize, and we lost that building. We lost the 5-6 building. And so now there's a 7-8 building at the middle school, which is where I teach now. So, things come and go, but I had a really good early experience, and the feedback from the parents and the kids, the positive response really was, a shot in the arm for me, and told me I had picked the right career too, because it was so rewarding.
Yeah, there's no question. And I want to ask, as I listen to you talking about the band, the one thing that always strikes me, it's probably because I never did it, is your time in DCI with the Phantom Regiment, and then you talked about the marching band. Can you talk about that, since it's so foreign to the show? It's not something I really mention much.
Oh, sure. The marching band experience that I had at Michigan State and the marching experience from Drum and Bugle Corps were really critical in the early success, because, the very first thing that you run into if you get hired in the summer is band camp and marching band. So that was really a strength and a skill set for me. And so I knew exactly how I kind of wanted to restructure the marching program, and I was able to get those seniors and those kids to buy into it. And I held a meeting right before band camp. I held a meeting of the seniors, and I said, tell me what you didn't like about band. And I got all kind of their thoughts about it. And the main thing was that they didn't want to be embarrassed. And I said, I promise I will never put you in a situation where you will be embarrassed. That was like my number one thing. And the other thing was that they wanted to look good in front of their friends. They wanted a sense of pride in the program. So I made sure that I stacked the deck for them and, didn't overwrite the drill and didn't over-program the music. And I made sure I put them in, physical drill shapes that were going to make them sound big and loud. And I was going to put the right players in the right parts of the field to make it impressive and play at least something the crowd was going to recognize and get into. So, I had a lot of experience in college and in drum corps that said, this is how you can sort of knock it out of the park on your first swing. And, again, I got lucky and I had the right support for it. But though all that stuff came from drum corps and from Michigan State.
Yeah, I have two questions that come from that. Let me start with the one most recent on my mind, and that's the idea of over-programming and under-programming. I sometimes think that when we push kids to do music or drill or anything that's at the tip of their abilities, we're not allowing them to be expressive and creative. And as you mentioned, we run the risk of putting them in a position where they're not going to excel. And so where's that balance for you? Where have you found that balance between under and over programming, or is there one?
I think it's almost like an 80-20 thing. 80% of, especially with like a marching band or an ensemble that's going to perform a lot, 80%, it needs to be stuff that they can read, that they can sight read the rhythms and the notes, and they can really nail so that they're not so busy trying to stop and think about fingerings and think about articulations and stuff, that they can actually focus on dynamics and making music out of it, especially if it has to be played Friday night. So the bulk of what you need to do is in their wheelhouse and doable. And that 20% that's a stretch, that's fine, and you need to do that, but you've got to make sure you've got 4 weeks for it. So, you want to get that music out to the kids far enough ahead of time that they don't freak out about it, and you can say, it's going to be fine. We're going to work on this. You're going to nail it. No worries. Because they'll trust you if you set them up for that kind of success.
Absolutely. I think it's a really interesting thing. I think, most young directors tend to go too far one way or the other. I think that's a pretty common experience. It takes a little bit of experience, but I really think that you hit the nail on the head. You don't need to have that much hard music to achieve progress every year, because we spend a lot of time with the kids.
Don't get me wrong. I blew it in concert band too. I mean, I was that young director who put a Lincoln portrait in front of them, because I was like, oh, we're going to make this fantastic, sophisticated music. And boy, did they not buy it on the first rehearsal. And I learned my lesson there too. So you do have to kind of fail, but you try to fail in places that the failure is on you as the director, not on the kids, never putting them in a position to fail publicly, obviously.
The main thing I really want to encourage, especially now we're in a time where, we're seeing we have to be creative about how we teach, is, more creativity with our students, allowing them the space to contribute to the ensemble and, try to allow them to be part of the music making.
Absolutely. I mean, that's my whole philosophy of music education, is trying to view it from the student standpoint. Like, what is it like to be a student in my classroom? Do they want to be here? Are they excited about it? Is this the best class of their day? Or are they here because they had to pick an elective, and if they missed a day tomorrow, would they be like, oh man, what happened in band yesterday? So trying to always be hyper aware of what is the experience in this room. Do I feel respected? Do I feel valued? Do I have agency? Do I have input? Like, if I were to go to the director and say, hey, what, this really cool song, could we play it? Is he or she going to be like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that, or are they going to listen and be like, oh yeah, that's really interesting. Let's think about that. So, I always want to be on that side of, and I don't, obviously I don't always nail it, but I want to try to do it from the standpoint of what is it like to be in here as a kid? Because they probably won't remember, at least in the middle school, they probably won't remember the songs they played or the names of the songs or whatever, but they're going to remember the emotion of being in that place. And that's kind of everything to me. Like, what was it like to be in that room?
It's that Maya Angelou quote that just sums up everything about what a good band director does, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We remember the experiences. We don't remember what people say. We remember how they make us feel. And band can make you feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So the other thing that came up when you were talking about the Phantom Regiment and marching band, and I make no secret of the fact that the last time I marched was in college in 1990. one, something like that. And I never taught marching band. The high school I taught, I'd only had a stand band. And what would you say to someone who maybe goes to a small school with a music ed program without a marching band? They're not going to a big land-grant university. Or maybe it's someone who's moving up from the middle school and they haven't taught marching band in a long time. Where are the resources? Where are the tools? How are they getting started there?
Oh man, there's so many resources. I mean, you can go to most of these summer symposiums and clinics, although this summer, of course, is awash, but you can really go and attend most of these summer symposiums. You can go to the Music for All conference, and you can go to these things where there's literally the best in the world instructors and caption heads and designers and everyone giving clinics on how to do this. So, those resources, first of all, is just fun to go to as a director. It's fun to take your summer and go listen to drum corps staff and college band directors talk about what they do, but also the number of networks that are available to us now, like the Facebook group for band directors. I mean, you could get on there and be like, hey guys, my position got switched. It's my first marching band gig. I need a drill writer. I need someone to help me with this. And literally 500 people will private message you and say like, here's what you do. I'll help you out in this way. I think our community, our profession of musicians and music educators is uniquely collaborative. I mean, people are so excited to share their knowledge and be helpful. It's just part of being a teacher, but also something about being a music teacher. You're acknowledging like, okay, this is really complex and you have to be really good at a lot of different stuff. And it's really hard. So when people ask a question that's outside of their niche expertise, people jump in and help. That's been my experience. So
it is a uniquely collaborative field. That's a good way of putting it. I always said it's so friendly.
It is.
I'll say this with a little bit tongue in cheek for the listeners who live in both worlds, but my wife is an orchestral musician. She's a cellist. And let's just say I don't find the orchestral world quite as warm and fuzzy as the band world is.
It's more competitive. It's a little more intense and serious. But I think the band world, and maybe it's because of the military band and the marching band component of it, we're used to sweating it out together and being out there in the rain and in the hot and just sort of living through these experiences together. And there's just like a bonding that happens. And I also think that collaborative thing is born of respect. Like we all understand that the different things that we each are experts at and the different instruments we all play, they're all so complex and so difficult to do really well. And so it's easy to ask someone for help when you know that the advice they're going to give you is superb and deep and well thought out. That's been my experience. I'm not shy about reaching out and asking people for like, how did you do that? And sometimes I don't get a response, but that's the worst that's going to happen.
I think you're right. I think, anyone who's been involved in band or choir or orchestra, there's an immediate bond because you understand each other.
And that's across anything. That's music theater or choir or orchestra. I mean, if you've been through the experience of being in front of all those faces staring at you, expecting you to perform and be excellent, you've been through the terror together. You're bonded.
So I'm also interested whenever I hear someone that's moved from the high school to the middle school, and you said that you've begun composing, and we're going to get into that. But what's that move been like for you? And you said this was your first year teaching beginners.
It was this was my first year as the 6th through 8th director just by myself.
Oh, okay.
This last school year I was doing 7th and 8th. And before that, a few years before that, I was doing just 8th in the high school. And so, slowly I kept moving closer and closer to the beginners. And when Pam decided she was going to retire out of band and go into she was teaching technology, that was sort of the opportunity where I was like, well, I need to make a choice here. And I only, obviously I only had so much control over that. But the thing that was terrifying me was those 6th grade flutes and clarinets and altos, because I'm a brass and percussion person. So I knew I just had to literally get my hands on those instruments and get out the beginning book and sit down and do it. And I spent my summer doing that. And, it actually was my favorite thing about this last school year was the beginning band stuff, because it was so exciting and new, and those kids were so excited to open their case.
I love it.
Yeah, it was really fun.
I love beginning band. I teach beginning fourth graders. It's just such a pleasure.
Fourth grade.
Yeah, it's just so visceral. And everything about it I love. I miss my college students. I miss the depth of discussions we could have.
Yeah.
And I miss conducting a high school band every day when I did that. But man, I love teaching fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh graders. They're great. Yeah,
it was the thing I was the most scared of, but it also it turned out to be the thing that was most interesting and fun for me this year, was that experience. And I kind of over prepared for it a little bit too. Like I picked other directors' brains and I scripted out exactly minute by minute what my first day of school was going to be like, and how to walk into the room, and all that great stuff I heard from, John Dennis's podcast about systems and procedures. I was like, I'm going to do it this way. And that was super helpful.
The episode I did with Mickey Smith Jr. is terrific in that.
I'm not caught up yet. I just saw it on your queue, but I got to get into there. Yeah, he's great. I've watched 1,000 of his videos.
So in your first year, after your first year of teaching beginners, let me ask you the question John asked me last summer. What did you do best with beginners, and what did you maybe need to work some on with the beginners?
Well, I had heard it preached to me so much that the critical thing is tone and getting a good characteristic tone on the instrument, that I had swallowed that pill and said, like, my kids are going to make a good tone if that's the only thing they do, which is so much more difficult than than you think it is.
Yeah, no, it's no doubt.
Especially when I'm like, oh, brass, no problem. And honestly, my brass players made a good sound early, and wow, was that a challenge with the clarinets for me. Because at the same time I'm trying to teach them, I'm also learning to play the clarinet and learning about all those complex embouchure things. And
have you listened to the Over the Break podcast?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, fantastic. She lays it out.
And she does. And in your head, you're like, oh, great. This is great. I'll go apply that knowledge now. And then it's chaos.
Sounds so easy, right?
Right. And they got the thing upside down, the ligatures backwards. And I really did try to do that. Yeah. Tone was my goal, which, I think we got a good foundation for it, but I also really wanted my kids to be rhythm readers. I feel like the most important thing when you're sight reading is rhythm first. And even if I'm with like an adult group or with the high school group, whatever, when we're sight reading something, I'll say, just play wrong notes, play the rhythms, but play the wrong notes if you need to, because rhythm is just so fundamental. So I really wanted to make sure I put rhythm reading into their heads. So we did a lot of that, and we did a lot of it up on the electronic whiteboard where they would, play these games, and the rhythm value would jump up and they have to like tap the thing and just try to make it fun. Rhythm reading and band procedure, like how we do band, how you walk into the room, where you put your case, and you put your name tag thing on the stand, and where you sit, and when we close our cases, all that. So they got really good at that after about the 5th week. And that was a huge point of pride for me, because, in high school, you can just be like, guys, go sit up. And they do it. I feel like I'm kind of in phase 2 of my teaching career. And I really like it. So
it's fun to teach new things. I mean, it's work, right?
Of course.
One of the, I don't know, I really struggled the beginning of last year. I really had a mental hurdle. I had taught theory for 15 years. Mm-hmm. So like I could walk into a theory room and I could see, okay, if I teach this skill today, it's going to apply in 3 months when they get to German sixths.
Right.
You know what I mean? I knew like that long arc of what the course was going to be. And so last year, that was the thing that was most scary. It's like, well, if I do something wrong with my 4th grade clarinet, it's what's going to happen in like when they're 7th graders.
Well, right. But I mean, that's the benefit, I think, of having taught high school, is that I was aware of what these kids need to do in 3 years and in 5 years and in 7 years. So I could sort of reverse engineer that. And those method books, they help, and they're a really good supplement. I don't think you can just like follow the method book, but my big goal with my 8th graders this year was that I wanted them playing in 6 keys by the time we got to the spring concert. That was just a goal. And I really had to push them. like every day we were doing that sequence, and they were just about there. Like D flat was still rough when everything blew up for the shutdown and around March 13th or whatever it was. But I felt like we had gotten really close to that goal. And it was cool to see those 8th graders who hadn't really bought into it very much to start to realize like, wow, we can really play our instruments now. Like we sound good. And I switched a couple of really rock star kids to tuba. So now we had this big full band sound, and they're like, hey, we sound like the high school band. And I was like, yeah, guys, you do. You're doing it. And so that was a very cool time. And I was so bummed they didn't get to do their spring concert. And I really hope a lot of them will continue on and do high school band, because they're going to have great experiences. But there's benefits to having been a high school band director, I think, if you're teaching beginners. And I think I was so scared of making that leap for a long time. But the honest truth is I loved it all. I loved the high school band. I loved the marching band. I loved the jazz band. I took the jazz band to France a couple times and got to gig with them. I love it all. So it's really tricky. And I love the composing too, you know?
All right, so let's talk about your compositional career. This is something you mentioned that's been about a decade now?
Yeah, just about. I mean, I was arranging a ton for my high school marching band and for the wind ensemble, and, you know, making parts and things. And we need to make like a transcribe a part, or you don't have a tuba or something. So I was doing that a lot and a lot of arranging. And then at a certain point realized like I can be writing original music here. So that kind of transitioned quickly about a decade ago. And 2013 was when I formed my own publishing company and went full steam ahead and started self-publishing my own music.
When did you first start having success as a composer? When did you like notice, oh, wait a minute, people are playing my music and this is starting to get some attention?
Well, I was lucky again, because I had a lot of success pretty quick. I think because I had so many people in my network who were really close friends and directors who were willing to read my piece or very quickly program my piece or very quickly program my piece at a conference or at a festival, and then more people heard it. So, you know, there's a lot of benefit of having been a band director and still being a band director and being part of that community, because there's trust built between directors. When you say, hey, I've got this new piece, it's grade 2 or it's grade 4 or whatever it is. And when you're just hanging out and talking with your friends and they're looking for a certain thing and they already know you and they like your writing, it's sort of an easier sell to get them to play like, here, you can read it down, and they program it that way. So I benefited from those really great relationships early on. And just in terms of the volume of people who were playing my music locally, mostly in Michigan, but a little bit outside of my network there too. And then, you know, a lot of those relationships led to building relationships with college band directors and those friendships. And once some college bands, and specifically Mike King at Bowling Green and David Thornton at Michigan State and Kevin Sedetall at Michigan State, once they started, you know, performing my music and people heard it performed so well, that really kind of was a shot in the arm for me. So I got lucky in that sense that there was some energy and excitement early on with my band music. And you know, I only have a few pieces for orchestra, but the big orchestra piece that kind of got a lot of attention in Michigan was when I wrote a full-length orchestral score for Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, and we performed it with the community orchestra with the film live, and made a big gala event about that. So that was just a really fun, cool experience. I'd always wanted to score a full movie, and was really inspired to do that. So there was a lot of buzz around that at the same time with the community orchestra and collaborations with the Flint Youth Symphony. So like most things, having a lot of great friendships and relationships and not abusing those relationships or, you know, trying to ask too hard or ask too much of your friends, but just making it available and being collaborative, that really has paid off. And then when my piece Gradients was selected for the National Band Association Alfred Award, that was a nice bump too, because there's a certain amount of press that comes with that and the chance to go to Midwest and receive that award. So yeah, I've been really lucky and just, had some good breaks. And I've not been afraid to ask, to send emails and to call people and say, I'd love to send this to you. And I think you have to be a little bit proactive like that and just sort of be ready for rejection or be ready to not hear from somebody and not take it personally.
Yeah, that's something I actually struggle with. People wouldn't believe it since I've asked all these people to be on this show, but I have definitely struggled with that.
With reaching out, you mean?
Yeah, I don't like sending those emails.
It's hard because you don't want to ever seem like you're bothering people and self-promoting too much. And it's a very delicate thing. And I don't know that I've always done a great job of it, especially on social media. Social media is so tricky because you do want to be able to say like, hey, that this cool thing that I've done is available and I'd love to be able to share it with some people, but you don't want it to sound, like you're just saying, hey, look at me. And it's very tricky to do. Some people do it really well and, others don't. And it always seems like a turnoff when it's not done well. And I don't want to ever do that. So I try to always make it about the ensembles that I get to work with. Like if I have a good performance from a really good band, I try to post in a way that's like, man, I got this great opportunity to go out and work with this amazing band program in such and such a place. And they had me come out, for the day as a guest composer and make it what it's really about, which is about people for performing music and kind of ride that as the composer. And so I try to let my experience as a music educator inform me about that dynamic and not abuse it, because I think that turns people off.
So Andy, you and I had a conversation a couple of months ago before the world went upside down, and we talked about your music a little bit. And so can you tell the listeners, are you self-published, commercially published, a combination? What does that look like for you? I
am self-published, and I'm a pretty strong advocate of self-publishing. I've turned down some offers from larger publishers, primarily because I didn't want to give up my copyright and the control of how the piece was marketed or allowed to be performed or arranged. I was also obviously turning down the benefits of their massive marketing and distribution and still having to do all the work myself. But I don't think the old publishing structure is necessarily designed with the composer in mind. It's a kind of a business model, and I think we're going to see that model change to stay competitive. There's so many of us who are self-publishing successfully now and finding access to distributors and dealers without having to give up creative or financial control. So, and in terms of marketing, we're seeing everybody forming these composer collectives, right? These ways of banding together, not necessarily as a publishing company, but as an associative entity for marketing purposes and displaying at conferences and the like, which it's kind of like a grassroots way of marketing and making it work. So yeah, I'm all about self-publishing. I think we're just going to see this model keep evolving in favor of the composers, because the internet really changed everything. I wouldn't say it democratized the industry, but it provided a platform for emerging composers to make their work available without having to sacrifice a substantial amount of profit to a gateholder publishing company. Yeah, so there's a lot of us that feel that way, and I think it's just going to keep moving that way. Yeah, it's interesting because I actually am published commercially. I'm published by Robert W. Smith's company and distributed by Barnhouse. But I really do value the self-publishing model as well. It's just, I think I've always maintained that it's got to be what you feel is right for you. Oh, sure. I didn't mean to put down traditional models. They will do a lot of that work for you. If you don't have the time in your life, or if you don't want to do those parts of it, of the engraving and the marketing and putting in the catalog and the record, that's fine if that's your choice. Like you said, it has to be what you want to do. But that there are financial, equations there about what a publisher will provide for you. But that's neither here nor there. The main thing for me was that I lose the copyright. It's, I give up creative control of my original work, and I just don't think I could live with this piece that is really important to me being used for whatever strange purpose or a really weird, arrangement on the field or something it wasn't meant to be. But you're right. It's a very personal decision about how you're going to do it as a composer. Because otherwise it's just commodities, right? You're just selling stuff.
Yeah. I mean, my choice was always that, I've got a lot of balls in the air right now. I don't want to deal with another one, shipping music out. That's just like the last thing I want to do.
Perfectly legitimate.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting. I enjoy talking to composers about how they've come up with their decisions to do what they do because, it's just an interesting kind of thing.
People have been really cool to me. Like early on, I saw Michael Markowski at Midwest, and I literally like stopped him in the hallway, and I was like, "Hey, how do you do this? And why did you choose this particular publishing thing?" And he was super cool and was like, "Well," and we had a conversation about it, and different people, and talking to John Mackey about it, and just seeing what their thoughts were about why they chose to go the way they went with that. And like you said, you got to shake it down to what you want to do and what works for you. But I definitely at this point am singing the self-publishing song.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a really valid arguments. I can't argue with any of it. So
I also like just one more thing on that.
Sure.
I like the flexibility of having control over how I can help directors. So here's a typical thing that happens all the time. It's Friday or Thursday before festival, and a director will email me and say, I couldn't get these scores for festival for the judges. Can I get a letter from the publisher that says I have permission to use photocopies or something? And I'll just instantly, within 5 minutes, fire off a letter to them that says, from the publisher, here's permission to use these photocopied things, or stuff like that, where I can like help people out for what they need instantly and not have to go through the red tape and all the stuff that you might have to do with a larger publisher. So I like that kind of access, and I almost customer service almost. I like that too about self-publishing.
Yeah, this is interesting because I ask this question a lot, and I think maybe you understand what I'm asking more than most who I ask it of, is if there's a high school director or a middle school director who wants to get into writing, what would you tell them? What would be their first steps?
Well, I guess I would tell them to cautiously start writing for their own group, within reasons, not like every day you're putting your stuff in front of your kids. That's ridiculous. But if you have access to an ensemble that can read the work that you're writing, then do it. Find a way to make it educational and part of your curriculum and part of your lesson. Have them read a couple bars of it or something. But you can take advantage of that. You've got them right there. They're going to give you critical feedback on the spot of if this works for them or if it doesn't work for them, or how that sounds. Especially if you don't use a program that has really good samples, you might not know if these three instruments are going to work together in terms of like a color combination or a timbral thing. So try it. Like have your students do it if you're doing that, or arrange some tunes for pep band or for marching band, just to kind of get your sea legs with that. But don't be afraid to do that with the people who want to play, because they actually get a real kick out of it. Obviously, if you don't abuse it. I wouldn't do it very often. And I didn't really do it too often other than arranging until I had a full piece. And then, I would do like one piece a year with my high school group or something. And they would always get really excited because it was like, hey, Mr. Perkins wrote this piece. And that was a fun way to connect with them too, because they would get excited about that personal connection there. So I would say, explore that, but also exploit your friendships. Like as a director, you have all those relationships I mentioned before. Talk to your friends, give out your music for sight reading purposes for free to your friends, and say, hey, if your group wants to read this down just for sight reading practice before a festival or something, here you go, give it a read. And then listen to their feedback, because your director friend might have a different group and they're like, hey man, I don't have any French horns, so you didn't cue this anywhere. You should probably cue this line somewhere for bands that don't have horns, or any number of a million little things like that. So listen to their feedback, but you can't get feedback unless you put your music out there, and you've got to find a way to do it.
How about if you had a young composer in one of your groups, what can you do to kind of foster their talent?
Well, the first thing I would offer them is to consider a career in music education. I think that music education is sort of a covert way for you to segue into being a composer really easily, because there are so many things built into a music education degree that will serve you as a composer. For example, all the methods classes you have to take. You have to learn how to play every instrument, and that's super valuable. Getting your hands and fingers on these instruments so you understand how they work and what their limitations are. And, being a music educator, especially instrumental music educator, it's constant score study. So you're looking at scores all day long and breaking them down and seeing how they're put together and who is doubling who and how these voices work together. It's score study. So you're literally learning about the thing you want to write. And you're in these classes and you're meeting and making friends with all of these other people who are going to be large ensemble directors, most likely. So you're building your network while you're studying this stuff. So there's a lot of reasons why music education is a valuable education in and of itself to get a job as a director, but you can segue into being a really great arranger and composer from the skills that are piggybacked onto that. And then, after that, I would say start small with what you know. If you play an instrument, write for that instrument, maybe write for one or two voices, and then get your friends to play it immediately. Write for 2 or 3 parts and put it in front of them. Even if it's like 8 bars, just put it in front of people, have them play it and get it performed, not necessarily in front of an audience, but hear it for real with real people, and then listen to their feedback. Because if you're not an expert on every instrument, which nobody is, someone's going to tell you like, hey, that trill doesn't exist, or it's really hard for me to lip slur in this particular way. Like I can't jump to that note and back down. And so you can learn quickly, especially if you're younger and you haven't had time on those instruments to know that doesn't work for somebody. You can learn quickly from their feedback and then start changing things, like react to that feedback. And I would say try everything, read everything. It's basically all free online if you're industrious and if you can look around and know the right question to Google. There's so many times, especially when I was starting to write some music for string ensemble, for string orchestra, I was really not sure about certain double stops, or if you could play 2 notes at once, if you need to cross a finger over a string. So I literally would just Google that and look it up. And then on Thursdays, I would go over to the community orchestra and, set that in front of one of my players and say, hey, does this work? And they would tell me if it did or if it didn't. And, it'd be a lot easier if you just did this. And they would show me on their instrument. And it was crystal clear, like, oh, okay, because you got to, put your finger over here or whatever. So, try everything. Ask every question of every player. And there's so much to learn that way, just, first person. And then get a mentor or several. Ask people, anybody. Most of the people in this community, most composers and arrangers and directors are very, very generous people. And they're, maybe not immediately on the spot, but they're generally really happy to get back with you and give you a few minutes of their time, or at least an email response about something. And if you really want to get a degree in composition and go down that road, then feel free to do that. By all means, like study composition seriously if you need to. But music ed is a fantastic route, and I would really highly recommend it as well, because if you find out that maybe you don't love composing, then guess what? You have a music ed degree. You might fall in love with being a music teacher too, which is a fantastic career. So I'm a pretty big evangelist of music ed as a vehicle to a lot of other music experiences. It's basically, I could say that whole thing again about conducting. If you want to be, an orchestral conductor, getting a music ed undergrad degree is really not a bad idea. There's so much knowledge and transferable ideas, and you're going to get time in front of an ensemble with a baton. You're going to have conducting classes. So I'm a big fan of music ed for a lot of reasons.
I think it's a good undergraduate degree. It's a gateway to almost everything else, as you mentioned.
Exactly right.
Remember your first term of teaching? Learning all the skills that you don't get taught in music school? Managing a transitioning culture in your classroom? Finding out that you have to teach guitar this term? During those early years, we found out that leaning on a community of music educators was important, not only for building that knowledge in ourselves, but also maintaining enough sanity to serve the students right in front of us. Amused is a podcast centered around a community of music teachers. Between the 4 of us, we teach choir, band, orchestra, general, jazz, and marching band at the elementary through collegiate levels. We certainly don't have all the answers, but you're welcome to listen in while we try to find them. Join us while we work through the challenges of music teaching and celebrate the joy of bringing music making into the lives of young people. In each episode, you'll hear stories, both good and bad, about that week of teaching, and we'll try and tackle an issue that one of us is struggling with. Something we're all taught is that music brings people together, but being the only teacher in your subject at a site can be really isolating. We think everyone ought to be a part of a community, and you're welcome to come join ours. Episodes come out on Wednesdays during the school year, and you can find us wherever you get your podcasts and at amusedcast.org.
All right, so let's get into the final questions here, Andy. And the first of these questions is, where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
Right. So I wrote my master's thesis on competition in wind band. So I kind of have thoughts about this. I think the critical thing is mindset. It's all about mindset. The right mindset about competition can be healthy, but it rarely is, in my opinion. If you ask any band kid on the bus to a competition, what is your goal at today's competition? They're probably not going to say, I really want to express myself musically and improve the general effects score by executing every passage with precision. They're probably going to say, I want to win, or I want to beat so-and-so. And that's kind of the problem as I see it, is there's only one winner when ensembles are ranked. So I have a major issue with ranked festivals and ranked competitions, because it ceases to be music education, it becomes sport, which is valuable. I mean, sport is very valuable. It just isn't music. And so we should be clear about that. And it creates a distorted sense of value too. I've had bands that played their hearts out at contests, the best performance of their lives, tears, and then seen them totally deflated when they see their placement. The music didn't change, but their interpretation of the value of what they did changed because of a ranking. So I'm not fond of that. I don't particularly agree with the ranking, but I don't necessarily have a problem with ratings when competing against a standard that is clear and realistic. I like rubrics for this reason, but I want to be clear too that checking all the boxes on a rubric does not constitute music making. The reality is that we're trying to get our students to work against their own limitations as musicians and not against other bands or other musicians. That gets nasty. And I don't like that idea of trying to outplay each other. Other musicians are not the enemy, and so if the motivation for improving is to defeat someone, you're doing it wrong, right? I mean, everyone wants to be outstanding, and there are a lot of ways to get there, but some are less healthy than others. Besides, the only way to actually scientifically, do this is to have everyone play the exact same music with no interpretation whatsoever, which is totally discouraging the essence of creative music making. And you're terrified of making a mistake and losing points, which is not a great headspace, to be in when you're performing. So it's the approach, it's the mindset. If we communicate effectively to our students, and if we truly believe this ourselves, that the performance is more important than the number that they get given for it, then we can be okay. But we have to practice what we preach. That we have to really believe that and show it to them, because they'll know. I mean, if we go in with this attitude as directors of like, we got to nail this and I want to beat so-and-so because they beat us at regionals last week, then it's all over, because the kids will do what you do and they'll follow your lead. So I'm okay with the ratings as long as the mindset is presented honestly and truthfully and correctly. And I will say, as a composer, it's I am motivated by the excellent work of other composers. And there's a kind of competitive spirit there, but that's more of an inspiration kind of a thing, born of admiration, right? I mean, I hear someone's fantastic work and I'm like, my goodness, that's amazing. I wonder what I can come up with. Like, I'm inspired by it. So, that lights a fire in me to push myself. I've never been disappointed with some other composer's success ever. I didn't lose to that composer. So, I feel like that's fine. That kind of intrinsic competition to push yourself to try to rise to a standard. But if you're trying to beat somebody, you're doing it wrong and it's not music.
All right, Andy, this is obviously a tough question for most musicians, and I imagine many people in general, but how do you find a work-life balance?
I don't think I did early on. I don't think most directors do that at first because you want to, pour your soul into what you're doing. But I was single and I was at school until 8 or 9, a lot of nights, and just, it wasn't sustainable. Those kids got a lot of me. So that, that was great for the program at the time, but it wasn't healthy for me. And then I would say over the last 18 years, as my life became more mine, and as I got married and had a family and then started composing and then, conducting the community orchestra and doing these other aspects of my life that were so valuable to me, things had to change in terms of the hours and the emotions that I gave to the program. And so, moving to the middle school was part of that equation. It was really difficult, but there's just a lot of hours at the high school that aren't part of the middle school gig. There's those Friday nights, and there's sectionals, and there's after school stuff, there's booster meetings, there's just stuff that it's all great. And I loved it all, but there's only so much of your life that you can give away to everyone else. And you have to start making tough decisions when you're missing family stuff. And it's very difficult. I mean, we have a job that requires that you pour your soul into it. And the only person that's going to know if you're out of balance is you. So you just got to be really careful about it.
Yeah, no question. It's a hard one. All right, Andy, this is a big question. You can take it as you wish. I know you've listened, so you've probably thought about it as you've listened. But what are the challenges facing music education and band, and how can we best meet them?
Yeah, well, they just compounded dramatically, didn't they?
Oh, they did
this situation. Indeed. I mean, pandemic aside, I think the challenges will always be to stay relevant in this environment that's increasingly filled with distraction. Our students have so many things competing for their attention and so many activities that they can engage in real life and digitally. And keeping band and choir and orchestra engaging and relevant and kind of keeping them as the place to be, that's going to be key. So I don't think there's one answer to this, but I know that for me, we kind of talked about this earlier, like as a music educator, my focus is going to be on the student experience and keeping that at the center of my teaching. Like, what does it feel like to be in my classroom? Do I want to be there more than anything else? If I can always keep band relevant that way, because making it personal is always relevant. Making it a place where that kid feels value will always make it important to them. That will always rise to the top. I think they'd rather be in the band where they feel important and valued than in this other activity where they're maybe not feeling that way. So I'm going to, that's how I'm going to do that is to keep my students at the center of the experience and the center of how I'm designing my class around that. As a composer, it's kind of the same thing with the stuff I write for developing bands. I want to meet those same targets by asking, like, is the music something that as a student that I can't wait to get into? Does it make me want to be able to perform it correctly and practice it if it's difficult? Does it make me feel things and imagine places or stories? I think the music has to, right? Music selection is so important. So if we're gonna keep band interesting and keep them engaged like that, the kids have to be begging to work on that repertoire. And we have to choose the right music too. So if they can't wait to play that tune, then there's something there, And as for the music I'm writing for advancing college bands and professional ensembles, I want to make sure that whatever I'm spending my time on is that I'm writing music of depth and complexity that's going to push the body of repertoire forward, that's going to matter 5, 10, 15 years from now to me and to the band community. I want to contribute music that's reflective of the world that we're living in and sort of my responses to those things that we're going through as an artist. But I think I guess what's most important is that we're not trying to solve every challenge, because there's so many. We need to focus on what we can do in our classrooms or in our studios or with our students or the ensembles we're writing for. What can you do where you are in the space that you're in? The worst thing we can do right now, I think, is just keep doing the same thing that's worked in the past and hope it still works post-pandemic and as the world gets more complex. But I'm confident that that we're going to get through this and thrive. I mean, music educators are some of the most brilliant, creative, passionate, driven people on the planet. I look at all the stuff coming from like CBDNA and NBA and ABA and like NAFME. There's great people putting their heads together right now to come up with a lot of solutions. So I'm not worried. I'm just anxious to get back to doing it. I think we all are.
So Andy, I've just invented a time machine and I offer to take you back to your high school graduation. What are you telling yourself?
I would say be patient and maybe don't be so hard on yourself. I think I had ridiculously high expectations of myself, and I had to learn that there's only so fast that you can learn and grow and find success. And that involves failure as a part of the equation. So you can't expect everything to go exactly as you planned. So yeah, give yourself some slack and don't worry so much. Be patient. It'll come in time if you keep working at it. And you can't please everyone. I would say that too. You can't please everyone all the time. You just can't do it. And if you try to, you'll please nobody and you'll resent them for it. So just do what you think is right.
Andy, if you could plan it out, what would be the final work for band or orchestra or anything that you'd want to conduct or perform? What do you think that would be?
All right, so I've got two because this question is so unfair. But if it's a wind band piece, I think I might have to go with Children's March. It's just such a unique march, and I love the singing parts in the trio that come in, where the band, the people who aren't playing sing. It's just beautiful, and it's kind of a special piece to me. So if it's band, I'll go Children's March. But for an orchestra piece, I would probably say the entire Pines of Rome, because, I mean, it ends the way it does, but also there's just so much to it, the complexity and the colors, and it's just so grand. But if I'm being honest, some of my favorite music in the world is the last 20 minutes of E.T., from the bicycle race all the way through the end credits. It's just pure magic. It's fantastical fun, and there's also so much thematic development and depth in there as well. And I have no shame about that choice. I know some people might roll their eyes, but it gets the nostalgia vote too there for me. A close second might be the Scene d'Amour from Vertigo, but then we're going to go down a whole rabbit hole of film score here.
Man, I love that film score. That's one of my favorite film scores.
Isn't it brilliant?
That's incredible. I think it's Bernard Herrmann's best score.
Yes, probably.
North by Northwest is pretty good, but
yeah, I was going to say you got to go head to head with North by Northwest too. Just the overture from North by Northwest is so brilliant with that fandango and how he makes it this dance across the country. So good. But that's a whole other podcast right there.
Something about the Vertigo score that just matches so well with that movie. It's just so in sync with the film.
I am so glad that you agree with that, because it's the only right answer.
All right. So is there any, well, this is an odd question, right? Because we're in pandemic. But is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote?
Nothing in person, but I just finished a large scale work for band. It's a suite of Michigan folk songs that I titled Tuabor, which Tuabor is a Latin word that appears on the flag and the Great Seal of the state of Michigan. It means I will defend, and it's a reference to Michigan's historic frontier position surrounded by the Great Lakes and bordering Canada. So it's in 3 movements, each focusing on folk songs about different aspects of 18th and 19th century Michigan, lumbering, shipping, and farming, and I'm really happy with it. It's a large consortium commission. There was 20 schools, including high schools and colleges and university groups here in Michigan, that went together for the consortium, and it's probably going to be a while before it's performed now, but you can hear the mock-up on my website and on YouTube of the Tuabor suite. And also, Arkansas State and Michigan State performed my fanfare, Clutch, at 2 different CBDNA regional conferences this past February. And those videos just recently went up on YouTube as well, so you can check those out. They're great performances if you're so inclined. But for the time being, I mean, every summer camp performance and all those gigs, that's all canceled for now. So we're just kind of waiting to see when we can all get back together.
So how can people get in touch with you?
Lots of ways, but you can just email me directly, composer@andrewdavidperkins.com, or visit my website. It's the same thing, andrewdavidperkins.com, or through social media as well. I'm happy to connect that way too.
Andy, thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark. It's been a blast.